Hi there, I'm Anna. My life took a sharp turn 5 years into my marriage with Paul. We were your average couple. I was a teacher. He was a manager at an energy company. Life was pretty straightforward. Then his dad passed away, leaving his mom, Elaine, all alone in their family house. It was then that Paul dropped the bombshell. Anna, we need to talk, Paul said abruptly one night, his tone serious enough to make me pause mid-scroll on my phone. I looked up. What's up? Everything okay? He took a deep breath. It's about Mom. She's alone in that old house since Dad passed. I think we should move in with her. I felt my stomach drop. Move in with Elaine? She and I were like oil and water. Paul, are you serious? You know Elaine and I barely get along. He leaned against the kitchen counter, his expression firm. I know, but she's my mom, and she's struggling. Plus, we're just burning money on this rented apartment. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. But this is our space, our home. Moving in with your mom is a whole different ballgame. Paul's voice took on a pleading edge. Please, Anna, it's not just about the space. It's about family. Mom needs us. I bit my lip, feeling cornered. Your mom needs us, or you need your mom. He frowned. That's not fair, Anna. It's not like I'm asking you to live in a dump. It's a huge house with plenty of room for all of us. I crossed my arms, feeling the tension rise. And what about our life here? Just uproot everything because Elaine snaps her fingers? Paul's tone hardened. It's not like that, and you know it. I'm thinking about what's best for everyone. I shot back. Everyone, or just Elaine? He threw his hands up in frustration. Damn it, Anna, can't you just try to see the bigger picture here? I glared at him. I'm looking at the bigger picture, Paul. Our life, our independence, not just playing happy families in that gloomy old house of hers. The argument went in circles, but eventually I caved. For Paul. For the sake of peace, but deep down, I dreaded every bit of it. Moving day came, and it was as uncomfortable as I imagined. Elaine's house was this imposing old structure with rooms that echoed and a constant chill in the air. Elaine greeted us with a stiff smile. Welcome to my home. I expect you to respect my ways. I forced a smile, trying to keep the peace. Of course, Elaine. We appreciate you letting us stay. But living with Elaine was like living with a hawk. She had a comment for everything. Don't put the dishes away like that, or you're overwatering the plants. It was relentless. One night, after a particularly harsh critique on my cooking, I exploded to Paul in our room. I can't do a damn thing right for your mother. It's like living with a drill sergeant. Paul rubbed his temples, looking equally frustrated. Anna, just give it time. She's old and set in her ways. I threw my hands up. Great, so we just tiptoe around her till the end of time. He didn't have an answer, and honestly, neither did I. This house, with its constant surveillance and Elaine's scrutinizing eyes, was suffocating. Life in Elaine's house was turning into a daily grind. Just when I thought I could handle it, Paul dropped another bombshell. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon, and I was trying to find some peace in the garden when he came out. Anna, we need to talk, Paul said, leaning on the garden gate. I looked up, feeling a knot in my stomach. What now, Paul? He took a deep breath. I think you should quit your job and stay home. We're spending a fortune on a nurse and housekeeper for Mom. It makes more sense. I stood up, anger rising. Quit my job, Paul. I love teaching. It's not just about the money. He ran his hands through his hair, his tone getting edgy. I know, but think about it. It'll make things easier around here. I shook my head, disbelief washing over me. So what? I just become a full-time maid and nurse? That's not the life I want. Paul's voice rose. It's not about what we want, Anna. It's about what's practical. My mom needs us. I glared at him. No, your mom needs you. I didn't sign up to be her caretaker. He shot back. Well, things change, Anna. We need to adapt. Adapt. That word felt like a slap. I loved my job, my independence. This wasn't adapting. This was sacrificing. You know what, Paul? Fine, I'll do it, but don't expect me to be happy about it. He sighed, a look of relief crossing his face. Thank you, Anna. It means a lot. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like I was losing a part of myself. Quitting my job was hard, but the days that followed were harder. I was now a full-time housekeeper, nurse, and cook. Elaine, as always, had her 2 cents to add about everything. Those curtains need a wash, she'd say, or the soup is too salty. It was endless. One day, I snapped. Elaine was criticizing the way I ironed her clothes, and I couldn't take it anymore. Elaine, can you just stop? I'm doing my best here. She looked taken aback. Well, I'm sorry if I have standards, Anna. I threw the iron down, my voice shaking with frustration. I'm not your servant, Elaine. I'm your son's wife. I'm here trying to help, and all you do is criticize me. There was a moment of tense silence, and then Elaine's expression softened slightly. I know you're trying, Anna. I'm just used to things a certain way. I sighed, feeling the tension drain out of me. I know, Elaine, but I'm not you. I have my way of doing things. From that day on, things were slightly better. Elaine toned down her criticisms, and I tried to accommodate her quirks. It was a fragile truce, but it was better than the constant battles. As time dragged on in Elaine's house, the atmosphere grew tenser, almost suffocating. Paul's behavior became increasingly distant and elusive. He was always late from work, and when he was home, he might as well have been invisible, holed up in the spare room like it was his sanctuary. One evening, unable to bear the silence and distance any more, I cornered him in the kitchen. Paul, what's going on with you? You're hardly here, and when you are, it's like you're not even my husband anymore. He avoided eye contact, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. Work's a nightmare right now, Anna. Just piles of stress. I leaned back against the counter, my arms folded. I get stress, Paul, but this feels like you're shutting me out. You're here, but you're not really here. He exhaled heavily, his gaze still fixed on his coffee. I don't know what you want me to say, Anna. I'm just really tied up with stuff. I wanted to believe him, to understand, but something inside me screamed that there was more to it. Then there was Lucy, Paul's sister, who made it her mission to add to the tension. Each visit from her was a trial. She'd look around the house with a sneer and quip, still stuck in this old dump pot. I usually bit my tongue, but one day her taunts hit a nerve. Not all of us have the luxury to mooch off others, Lucy. I shot back. She just cackled, her voice grating on my nerves. Oh, look at you, playing the martyr in a haunted house. Pathetic. I clenched my jaw, holding back a barrage of words. Paul, ever the silent bystander, offered no defense. His silence was like another jab, another confirmation of the growing gulf between us. The biggest shift, however, came with Elaine. One day she called for Lucy, her voice frail and desperate. Lucy, I need help with a bath. I can't manage on my own anymore. Lucy's response was cold and cutting. Help yourself, Mom. I'm not your caretaker. Elaine broke down in tears, and my heart couldn't take it. Despite our rocky history, I couldn't leave her in that state. I helped her with the bath, and something between us changed that day. Elaine started to warm up to me, treating me less like an intruder and more like a daughter. It was a welcome change, but it also highlighted how far Paul and I had drifted apart. The house felt colder, emptier, despite Elaine's newfound warmth towards me. The walls seemed to echo with the growing silence between Paul and me, a chasm that seemed to widen with each passing day. The chill in our home grew colder each day. Paul's late nights at work became a norm, and our conversations turned into mere whispers of their former selves. It was during one of these fleeting interactions that Paul dropped a new piece of news that would add to the growing pile of secrets and lies. "Anna, I got an apartment near work," he said nonchalantly, as if he was talking about the weather. I almost dropped the dish I was cleaning. "An apartment? Why on earth would you need that?" He leaned against the door frame, avoiding my gaze. "It's just practical. Anna, saves me the commute, especially with the late nights." I felt a surge of anger and confusion. "And you just decided this without talking to me? What are we, roommates now?" He shrugged, his indifference cutting deep. "I thought you'd be happy. Less stress about me coming home late." I shook my head, disbelief coloring my tone. "Happy, Paul? This feels like you're living a double life. What's next? You'll tell me you have a second family there?" He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Don't be dramatic, Anna. It's not like that." I wanted to push further to break through his nonchalant facade, but I knew it was futile. The conversation ended there, as did many of our conversations those days. The true shock came a few days later in a candid conversation with Elaine. We were in the living room, sharing a rare moment of calm, when she suddenly said, "You know, Paul didn't buy that apartment with his money." I looked at her, puzzled. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then continued. "He used my savings. He said it was an investment. He even put it in my name." Felt my heart sink. "He's been using your money, and you're okay with this?" Elaine shrugged, a sad look in her eyes. "I couldn't say no. He's my son, but I thought you should know." I was speechless. Paul's secret apartment was one thing, but using his mother's savings under the guise of an investment, it felt like the man I married was slipping away, replaced by this stranger with secrets and lies. A few days later, I confronted Paul about it. "Paul, why didn't you tell me the apartment was bought with your mom's money?" He was unapologetic, almost defiant. "Because I knew you'd react like this. It's an investment, Anna. It's not a big deal." I couldn't believe his audacity. "Not a big deal? You're gambling with your mom's savings and keeping it from me. What else are you hiding?" He turned away, ending the conversation with a dismissive wave. "You wouldn't understand, Anna. It's business." Business. That word felt like a chasm between us, an excuse for everything that was going wrong in our marriage. Living in Elaine's old, dreary house was taking its toll on me. The walls, once probably vibrant, now echoed a somber tone, and every creaking floorboard seemed to whisper secrets. One day, I just couldn't take it any more. "Elaine, have you ever thought about renovating the house?" I asked over breakfast. "It could use some freshening up." Elaine looked up from her tea, surprised. "Renovate? I haven't thought about it in years. It's such a big task." I nodded, feeling a spark of enthusiasm. "I know, but it could really brighten up the place. Maybe just start with a new coat of paint or some new wallpaper." Elaine considered it for a moment. "Well, I suppose it wouldn't hurt to bring some new life into this old house. But are you sure you're up for it?" I smiled, eager for a project. "Absolutely. It'll be a good change." And so it began. I threw myself into the renovation, painting walls, choosing wallpapers, and even attempting to restore some of the old furniture. It was hard work, but it felt good, like I was breathing life back into the house and, in a way, into myself. One day, while I was up to my elbows in paint, Paul walked in. He looked around, his expression one of shock and disbelief. "What the hell, Anna? What are you doing to my mom's house?" Stood up, wiping the sweat from my brow. "I'm renovating, Paul. Like I told Elaine, it's time this place got a little love and care." Paul's face reddened. "You had no right to start changing things without asking me. This is my family home, not some DIY project." I felt my temper rise. "Your home? When was the last time you even cared about this place, Paul? I'm doing something good here." He took a step closer, his voice rising. "You're overstepping, Anna. You always do this. Take control and push everyone else aside. I stared at him, incredulous. Take control? Paul, I'm trying to make this gloomy place livable. Maybe if you spent more time here, you'd see that. Before Paul could retort, Elaine walked in. What's all this noise about? Paul turned to her. Mom, did you know about this? About her changing the house. Elaine looked from me to Paul, then back again. Yes, I did, and I'm glad she's doing it. This house needed a change, and Anna's doing a wonderful job. Paul looked like he'd been slapped. But it's our family home. Elaine cut him off, her tone firm. It's my home, Paul, and I want this. Anna has every right to do what she's doing. Paul stormed out of the room, leaving me and Elaine in an awkward silence. I felt a mix of victory and sadness. The house was transforming, but the gap between Paul and me seemed to only grow wider. The day Elaine suffered her stroke, our world turned upside down. I was there, witnessing her sudden decline, her words slurring, her body weakening. Panic gripped me as I called for help, my voice quivering with fear. In the hospital, the grim reality set in. Elaine needed constant care. I looked to Paul for support, but he was distant, his eyes void of the concern I expected to see. Anna, I can't deal with this. I have enough on my plate, he said, his voice cold. I was stunned. You can't deal with this, Paul. She's your mother. He shrugged, his response cutting like a knife. Yeah, and she's been a burden for years. This is just the cherry on top. I couldn't hide my disgust. She's not a burden, Paul. She's family. She needs us. His laugh was bitter. Us? No, Anna, she needs you. I've got other things to handle. I was left speechless, my respect for him sinking. Took it upon myself to care for Elaine. It was hard, watching the once strong woman confined to a bed, dependent for every little thing. As I became Elaine's primary caregiver, Paul's visits grew rarer and his indifference more apparent. His visits were short, his conversations with Elaine brief and superficial. Then Lucy came. I overheard them in the living room, their words like venom. We should start thinking about the will, dividing the assets, Lucy said, her voice devoid of any emotion. I burst into the room, fury coursing through my veins. How can you be so heartless, discussing her will right in front of her? She's still here. Lucy smirked, her words sharp. Oh, look who's talking. The saintly daughter-in-law. This is our family's matter. Stay out of it. Paul chimed in, his voice laced with cynicism. Anna, just drop it. It's practical to plan these things. No use pretending she's going to bounce back. I was aghast at his cruelty. Practical. She's your mother, Paul. How can you be so callous? He shrugged, his reply cold and detached. Life's callous, Anna. Better get used to it. I turned away, my heart heavy with disgust. In the following weeks, I dedicated myself to Elaine's recovery, and to my surprise, she showed signs of improvement. Her fingers twitched, her speech cleared, she even managed a few steps. It was a miracle to me, but a nuisance to Paul and Lucy. Their true colors were now vividly clear. Their mother's plight was nothing more than an inconvenience, a hurdle in their path to inheritance. The betrayal stung deep, not just as a daughter-in-law, but as a human being. Life had settled into a grim routine. Elaine's health was a constant roller coaster, with small victories overshadowed by the looming fear of the worst. Then it happened. Another stroke, this time more severe. The call from the hospital felt like a punch to the gut. Elaine didn't make it. The funeral was a somber affair. I stood beside the grave, my heart heavy, watching as people paid their respects. That's when Paul arrived, and with him, a woman I didn't recognize and two small kids clinging to her hands. Who's she? I whispered to myself, my eyes fixed on the unfamiliar woman. Paul approached, his expression unreadable. Anna, this is Carol, my wife, and these are our kids. I felt like I had been slapped. Your wife? When did this happen? He shrugged, a coldness in his voice. A while ago. It's none of your business, Anna. I was speechless, my mind reeling. How could he, and during all this time with Elaine? Lucy was there too, her usual sneer in place. Finally showing your true colors, Anna. Playing the grieving daughter-in-law. It's a bit late for that. I glared at her, my voice laced with contempt. I was here for Elaine when you both abandoned her. Don't you dare judge me. Paul interjected. Let's just get this over with. We have other matters to discuss. After the funeral ended and the gathering moved to Elaine's house for the will reading, Paul and Lucy were like vultures, eagerly awaiting their share. The lawyer began reading the will, and that's when the bombshell dropped. Everything, the house, the money, all of it was left to me. Paul's face went from smug to shocked. What the hell? This can't be right. Lucy was fuming. She was our mother. How could she leave everything to this nobody? I stood there, stunned, not sure how to feel. Happy, vindicated. It all felt hollow. Paul turned to me, his voice filled with accusation. You manipulated her, didn't you? Turned her against us. I shook my head, disbelief and anger mixing in my voice. I did nothing but care for her, which is more than I can say for you. The lawyer intervened. Elaine was very clear in her will. Lucy was seething. This is not the end. We'll contest this. There's no way we're letting her get away with this. As they left in a huff, I stood there, alone in the house that was now legally mine. The walls that had witnessed so much pain, betrayal, and love. I looked around, feeling the weight of Elaine's last act of kindness and the burden of a broken family's scorn. The house felt different now, like it was echoing with Elaine's last wishes. I was sitting there, holding the will, still trying to get my head around everything. Elaine had left it all to me, and Paul and Lucy were raging mad about it. They came back the next day, all fired up. You really think you can just take everything? Paul burst out as soon as he stepped in. I looked up, tired but standing my ground. Elaine decided this, Paul. It was her choice. Lucy was red in the face, yelling, You tricked a sick old lady. We won't let you get away with this. I stood up, fed up with their nonsense. Tricked. I was there for her, unlike you two. She chose to leave it to me. Paul was fuming. So you think you've beaten us? You think you can just snap? But it had to be done. He and his new family had to move to a rental place. Lucy had her own mess to deal with. Her debts and bad choices were catching up to her. As for me, I was standing in my new house, feeling sad but also kind of excited. Elaine's will wasn't just about the house and money. It was like she was telling me to be strong and make my own way. I decided to start over, use what Elaine left me to build something new for myself. The house, once a reminder of tough times, was now a place for new beginnings.
On my wedding day, my fiancé forced me to wear his mother's 15-year-old dress. When I refused, he slapped me hard, and I fell to the floor, with his mother watching and controlling every move. She had the audacity to say, How dare you defy me? That was the last straw. I left the event and sought revenge. Within 24 hours, they were both behind bars. My name is Nancy Carter, and I'm 27 years old. I grew up in Atlantic City, New Jersey, where everything seemed pretty normal until it wasn't. I met Jacob Walker 5 years ago, and it felt like fate. He was charming, attentive, and we just clicked. At first, I thought he was the person I was meant to spend the rest of my life with. He felt like home. We had so many dreams together. Our relationship was perfect, or at least I thought it was. In May 2023, after almost 5 years of being together, Jacob proposed. It was one of the happiest moments of my life. I never imagined my engagement would be the start of something beautiful, a new chapter filled with love and family. We were planning to get married in June 2024, and I couldn't wait to start this next chapter. But things started changing even before the wedding planning began. At first, I thought I was just being overly excited, but Jacob became more and more distant. I was so caught up in the idea of the wedding, picking out the dress, choosing colors, and planning the entire event, but Jacob didn't seem to care. He was always busy, always distracted. Every time I showed him pictures or asked for his opinion, he just responded with a quick, "looks good," or sent a thumbs-up emoji. That was it. His indifference was more than just a lack of interest in the wedding. It felt like he was pulling away from me in every way. But what made it worse was his mother, Margaret. I didn't notice it at first. I thought it was sweet how close they were. She would call him multiple times a day, asking for his thoughts on everything, from what he should have for lunch to bigger life decisions. I remember thinking it was a bit much, but I didn't mind. I figured it was just a part of who he was, that he was a mama's boy, and that was fine. But as the months passed, I began to see the cracks in our relationship, and I started feeling like I was competing with her for his attention. I should have known something was wrong when I showed him my wedding dress. I had spent hours choosing it. Perfectly elegant, classic, the one I had dreamed of for so long. I was so excited to share the moment with him. I sent him a picture, hoping he would be as excited as I was, but his response was underwhelming. "It looks beautiful," he texted. That was all. But what I didn't know was that he had immediately sent the photo to his mother, and that's when everything began to fall apart. The next day, I received a call from Jacob, telling me that his mother had seen the dress and was very upset. I couldn't understand why. Margaret wanted me to wear her wedding dress, the one she had worn 15 years ago. She insisted it was tradition, that it was important to her. I was stunned. I had never agreed to wear her dress, never promised to do that. I had only made a passing comment years ago about how beautiful it was, but that didn't mean I was bound to it. When I tried to talk to Jacob about it, he didn't take my side. He acted like it wasn't a big deal, saying, "Mom's just upset, Nancy. Can't you make her happy?" I was so hurt. Why was I the one who had to sacrifice my happiness for his mother's? He said he just wanted to avoid conflict, but I wasn't the one causing the conflict. Margaret was. What really got to me was that Jacob didn't even stand up for me. He didn't defend my choice to wear the dress I loved. Instead, he acted like it was just another thing I was being unreasonable about. He was so concerned with keeping the peace with his mother that he completely disregarded my feelings. I kept telling myself that once we got married, everything would change. I convinced myself it was just a phase, that maybe he was just under pressure. But I was wrong. The wedding day was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. I had been waiting for this moment for so long. I had spent so many hours planning, from the venue to the flowers, the music, and everything in between. But as I stood in front of the mirror in my beautiful gown, ready to start my day, Jacob walked in holding Margaret's old dress. His face was serious, his tone firm. "Darling, you'll wear this dress today," he said, his voice cold. I was in shock. I couldn't believe it. He was telling me to wear her dress, not mine. The one I had chosen, the one I had dreamed about. The dress I had spent months picking out. I felt humiliated, but I also felt betrayed. "This is what my mother wants," he added, as if that made it okay. I couldn't believe my ears. I was crushed. I tried to explain, tried to reason with him. "Jacob, this isn't what I want. I've spent so much time picking out my dress, and it's what I feel beautiful in. Please understand." But he didn't listen. Then came the moment that changed everything. His expression darkened, and before I could say anything else, he slapped me, hard, across my face. I was stunned. The shock of it sent me crashing to the floor. His mother was watching, standing there, her face cold and triumphant. She had won. She was in control. I couldn't believe what had just happened. Jacob, the man I had loved for so long, the man I had trusted, had just struck me in front of his mother. The slap was painful, yes, but the emotional hurt was even worse. I felt so small, so insignificant. I had spent so many years believing in him, in us, and in that moment, it all came crashing down. Margaret's voice echoed in the room, her tone cold and calculated. "If you don't obey my orders, you cannot marry my son." That was it. That was the moment I knew it was over. I was done. Without saying another word, I turned around and walked out. I couldn't be in that house, that relationship, any longer. I had to leave. There was nothing left for me there. My life had become a lie. As I walked out the door, my heart shattered into a million pieces. I had lost everything I thought I had, but I knew one thing. I had to protect myself. I couldn't stay in that toxic environment, and I couldn't let Jacob and his mother get away with what they had done. The betrayal was too deep. That was the beginning of my journey to reclaim my life, but I didn't know just how far I would have to go to get the justice I deserved. The next steps would be painful, but I wasn't going to let them win. Not this time. I walked out of that house with nothing but the clothes on my back, my heart racing, and my mind in turmoil. I couldn't understand how it had all gone so wrong. Jacob had never been like this before. Yes, he had always been close to his mother, but I thought that was just a part of who he was. I never imagined it would come to this. But as I stood outside, shaking, the reality hit me. This wasn't just a bad day. It was the end of everything I had believed in. I called my brother, Michael, the only person who had always supported me no matter what. He answered on the first ring, and I could hear the worry in his voice. "Nancy? Where are you? What happened?" I was barely holding myself together. "Michael, I need you." I left. I had to leave. Within minutes, Michael was at my side. His face showed a mix of anger and concern, but he didn't say anything. He just wrapped his arms around me, offering the only thing he could, his support. "You did the right thing, Em. No one should ever make you feel like that." I stayed with him that night. I didn't want to be alone. I was broken, devastated, and full of questions. What had happened to Jacob? What had happened to the man I loved? But I couldn't let myself stay in that place of hurt forever. I wasn't going to let Jacob or his mother control me anymore. I had to do something that would make them understand that I wasn't a doormat, that I wasn't someone they could trample over. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about everything that had happened, the slap, the humiliation. I kept thinking about how Margaret had orchestrated the entire thing. She wasn't just controlling Jacob, she was controlling everything around her, including me. I had been nothing but a pawn in their sick little game, and I couldn't let it go. I had to make them pay. But I wasn't going to make it easy for them. I was going to take control back. The first thing I did was take a deep breath and gather my thoughts. I didn't want to act out of anger, though I was angry, so angry that I couldn't think straight. I needed to be strategic. I needed to expose the truth. And that's exactly what I did. I wrote an anonymous email detailing everything. Everything. I described how Jacob had allowed his mother to manipulate me, how he had hidden the truth about his mother's demands, and how he had slapped me on our wedding day just because I wouldn't comply with his mother's wishes. I didn't hold back. I made sure to emphasize how toxic their relationship was, how unhealthy it was for me to have been caught in the middle of it. I sent the email to everyone I could, friends, family, people I knew had been close to Jacob. I made sure they understood exactly what kind of man he was and what kind of influence his mother had over him. I wanted them to see the truth, to see the side of Jacob that I had seen, the side of him that had been hidden behind his charming facade. But that wasn't enough. I needed to make sure they didn't get away with it. I had discovered something during our relationship that I hadn't paid much attention to at the time. Jacob was involved in some shady business deals, illegal import-export activities that I had stumbled upon one night when I was going through his things. I had kept quiet about it, thinking it wasn't my place, but now it was my weapon. I couldn't let him keep getting away with it, not after what he had done to me. I contacted the authorities and anonymously tipped them off about Jacob's involvement in the illegal activities. I gave them the evidence I had, everything I knew, and let them take it from there. It felt empowering. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing something right, something that would finally bring justice. The next few days were a blur. I spent my time processing everything, talking to Michael, and trying to piece together the parts of my life that had been shattered. I knew Jacob and his mother would try to fight back, but I wasn't afraid. I wasn't going to let them win. I had already lost so much, but I was determined not to lose myself. Meanwhile, the email I sent had caused a stir. People began to talk. Jacob's friends, his family, they started to question him, to wonder what kind of person he had become. The truth was out there now, and no matter how hard Jacob tried to defend himself, the damage had been done. I wasn't the only one who knew about his mother's control over him. Everyone was starting to see it. As for Margaret, I could only imagine the chaos she must have been causing behind the scenes. She must have been furious. But I didn't care. I wasn't afraid of her anymore. I had to protect myself. I had to show the world that I was strong, that I wouldn't let her or Jacob dictate my life anymore. The police investigation into Jacob's illegal activities moved quickly. Within a few weeks, both Jacob and his mother were arrested. The charges against them were serious, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. They had tried to break me, to control me, but I had fought back. And in the end, I had won. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, and it was about reclaiming my life. I had been manipulated for so long, but now I was free. I had taken back my power, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me again. The days after Jacob and Margaret's arrest were a strange mix of relief and disbelief. On one hand, I couldn't believe that everything had finally come to an end, but on the other hand, it felt almost surreal to know that the people who had hurt me so deeply were finally facing the consequences of their actions. The moment I heard the news that Jacob and his mother were both behind bars, a wave of emotions washed over me. I felt anger, but it wasn't the furious kind of anger that had consumed me right after the wedding. It was the kind of anger that came from years of being manipulated, of being forced into a corner, and of realizing how much time I had wasted. I had let them control me for so long, but now I was free. I didn't celebrate their downfall, but there was a sense of closure in knowing they could no longer hurt me, no longer hold any power over me. It wasn't about getting revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming the life I deserved. I was done being a pawn in their twisted game. But even though the legal battle was over, the emotional toll it had taken on me wasn't something I could just erase. I was still processing everything that had happened, trying to make sense of how I had let myself get so deep into a relationship with someone who had no respect for me. I thought I had known Jacob, but I had only seen the version of him that he wanted me to see. The real Jacob, the one who let his mother control every aspect of his life, was someone I never wanted to know. I took time for myself after everything went down. I stayed with Michael for a while longer, just trying to heal and find my footing again. I wasn't ready to dive back into the world, not yet. I needed space, time to breathe, and figure out who I was without Jacob. I had to remind myself that I was more than just his fiancé, more than just someone who had been manipulated by his mother. I had to rediscover who I was, what I wanted, and what I deserved. During this time, I also started going to therapy. At first, I wasn't sure it would help. I didn't want to talk about what had happened, didn't want to dig through all the pain and betrayal. But as I began to unpack my emotions, I realized how much I had ignored over the years. I had made so many compromises for Jacob, put aside my own happiness, and neglected my own needs. I had allowed his mother to dictate our relationship, and I had let Jacob walk all over me without standing up for myself. Therapy gave me the tools to understand why I had let it happen, and more importantly, how I could avoid repeating the same mistakes in the future. I also started focusing on rebuilding my life. I went back to the hobbies I had put aside for so long, things I loved but had sacrificed for the relationship. I spent more time with friends, the ones who had supported me through everything, and I reconnected with my family. Michael, especially, was my rock. He had been there every step of the way, and his unwavering support meant the world to me. But even as I started to heal, there were moments when I would feel the weight of everything that had happened. The emotional scars didn't disappear overnight, and the pain still lingered. I kept thinking about the woman I was before Jacob, the one who had been full of dreams and hope. I had lost that version of myself for a while, but now I was starting to find her again. One of the hardest things to accept was that I had to let go of the idea of what my life could have been. I had imagined a future with Jacob, one filled with love, family, and shared dreams. But that future had been built on lies and manipulation. And as painful as it was, I had to let go of it in order to move forward. It was the only way I could truly heal. Despite everything, I felt stronger now. The woman I was becoming was more self-aware, more resilient, and more in control of her own destiny. I had learned to trust myself again, and I wasn't going to settle for anything less than what I deserved. Jacob and his mother had tried to destroy me, but in the end, I had found my way back to myself. And so I moved forward not with anger, but with strength. They had lost their hold on me, and I was ready to embrace the future, whatever it held. I wasn't going to let anyone, especially not someone like Jacob, take away my happiness again. As the weeks passed, I began to feel a sense of peace settling over me. It wasn't immediate and it wasn't perfect, but it was real. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally living for myself, not for anyone else. The heavy burden of trying to please Jacob and his controlling mother was gone, and I could finally breathe again. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about living. I started doing things for myself, things I had neglected for so long. I enrolled in an art class that I had always wanted to take, but had put off. I started hiking in the nearby woods, something I used to love but had given up to accommodate Jacob's busy schedule. I reconnected with old friends who had drifted away during my time with him, and I found that they were still there for me, still supporting me in ways that meant more than I could ever explain. But there were moments when I would still feel a pang of sadness. The life I had imagined with Jacob, the weddings, the family, the future, was no longer possible. It was gone. And as much as I had moved on, those moments of loss still crept up on me, especially when I saw happy couples or when I'd hear his name mentioned. I couldn't help but feel that ache in my chest. But I also realized that the pain was a reminder of how far I had come, how much I had grown. One day, I received a letter. It was from Jacob's father, a man I had never really known. I had met him a few times during family gatherings, but he was always distant, never fully involved. I hadn't expected anything from him. But the letter he sent was unexpected. It wasn't a plea to take Jacob back or to forgive him. Instead, it was an apology. He acknowledged the pain his son had caused me and expressed his regret for not being more present to stop the toxic relationship that had developed between Jacob and his mother. I read that letter over and over, and for the first time since everything had happened, I felt a small sense of closure. It wasn't from Jacob, and it wasn't what I had hoped for, but it was something. It was an acknowledgement that the abuse I had suffered hadn't been my fault. That small gesture from his father gave me peace in a way I never expected. As time went on, I continued to heal. I went on a trip to Paris with my best friend, Laura, who had stuck by me through it all. What was supposed to be my honeymoon became an unforgettable sisterhood adventure. We wandered through the streets, ate delicious food, and laughed more than I had in years. It wasn't the romantic escape I had once dreamed of with Jacob, but it was better than anything I could have imagined. It reminded me that there were still beautiful, meaningful moments waiting for me. When I returned from Paris, I took a long, hard look at my life. I realized that, for the first time, I wasn't focused on what I had lost. I was focused on what I had gained: freedom, strength, and the ability to trust myself again. I never fully understood why Jacob had turned into the person he had, why he had allowed his mother's control to seep into every corner of our relationship. But I realized that the answers didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I had taken back my life. I had chosen myself, and that was the most empowering decision I had ever made. The final piece of closure came when I sold the engagement ring, the one that had once held so much hope and promise. I didn't want to keep it as a reminder of the past. I sold it and donated the money to a domestic violence shelter. It felt like I was turning something painful into something good, something that could help others. I was stronger now, more resilient, and more in control of my own future. Jacob and his mother were in the past, and I had no intention of ever looking back. I had learned that true happiness comes from within, and it wasn't something anyone else could give me. As I moved forward, I knew that when I was ready to open my heart again, I would do it on my terms. But for now, I was content. I had rebuilt my life, step by step, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. The future was mine to shape, and I was ready for whatever it had to offer.
This story is titled, Just an Hour Before My Sister-in-Law's Wedding, I went into labor and my mother-in-law took my phone and locked me in the bathroom, saying to hold off for a while so that I don't steal sister-in-law's spotlight and ruin her special day. A few hours later, I woke up in the hospital and my mother-in-law was begging me not to press charges. Hey everyone, before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Hi Reddit, I never thought I'd find myself posting here, but I'm seriously losing my mind over what went down 2 weeks ago. It's been eating away at me, and I need to put it out there to see if I'm overreacting or if this whole situation is as insane as it feels. So get ready, because this one's a doozy. A little background to set the stage. My husband, Tom, 31 male, and I, 28 female, recently welcomed our first baby, Lily. She's perfect, by the way, but her arrival was far from what I imagined. Instead of the magical, tear-filled moment I had dreamed about, it turned into a total nightmare. And the people responsible? My mother-in-law, Margaret, and my sister-in-law, Vanessa. You know, the kind of people who make you question whether karma actually exists. Vanessa got married 2 weeks ago. She's 27, super self-absorbed, and married Greg, one of Tom's best friends. I was supposed to be a bridesmaid, which was fine when I agreed like a year ago. But by the time the wedding rolled around, I was 9 months pregnant. Like full-on waddling, can't see my feet, could go into labor any second kind of pregnant. I politely backed out as a bridesmaid months in advance, figuring that was the right thing to do. Vanessa? Oh, she was not happy. She didn't outright say it, but she made sure I felt the passive-aggressive vibes loud and clear. Comments like, I just wish everyone cared as much about my big day as I do, or, pregnancy isn't an excuse to let people down. I tried to let it roll off my back. Margaret was no better, constantly telling me I should try harder to make an effort, because you only get married once. Apparently, being in labor doesn't count as a good reason to sit out. Despite all that, I decided to go to the wedding. Tom really wanted us to show up, and part of me thought, maybe I'm overthinking this. Let's just be there for Vanessa and get through it. Big mistake. Huge. The ceremony was in this picturesque outdoor venue. Gorgeous, right? Except it was also like 90 degrees, and I was sweating like a marathon runner. I had to keep stopping to catch my breath because, well, 9 months pregnant and walking don't mix. By the time we got there, I was already regretting my decision. But I put on my polite smile and tried to keep it together. Then came the moment everything went sideways. Just before the ceremony started, I felt this sharp pain, like sharp enough to make me freeze. I leaned over to Tom and whispered, "Something's happening." He looked at me like I'd just told him aliens landed. I excused myself to the nearest bathroom, hoping I was just dehydrated or something. Nope. My water broke right there. I was officially in labor. At that point, I was panicking. I mean, what do you even do in that situation? I texted Tom to come meet me upstairs, but guess who found me first? Margaret. I explained what happened and begged her to get Tom. "Please, Margaret, I'm in labor. Get Tom now." I gasped, clutching the sink for support. She stood there, arms crossed, glaring at me like I was some kind of nuisance. "You're not going anywhere," she said coldly. "You're not ruining this wedding for Vanessa. Do you hear me? Ruining it. I'm having a baby." I shot back, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped toward the door. "Stay here until it's over. You'll be fine," she added before locking the door behind her and walking away. I thought she was joking. Like, what kind of person says that when someone is in labor? But she was dead serious. She kept going on about how I should have stayed home if I couldn't handle it, and how Vanessa had been stressed enough without me making a scene. I couldn't even respond. I was in so much pain, and this woman was acting like I had just confessed to burning the wedding cake. Then the unthinkable happened. Margaret locked me in the bathroom. I didn't even realize what was happening until I heard the door click. She said something like, "Stay here until it's over. You'll be fine." And then she walked away. With my phone, I lost it. I started pounding on the door, screaming for help, but the music had already started and everyone was downstairs. I'm not gonna lie, I was terrified. The contractions were getting worse, and I was stuck in a freaking bathroom with no way out. I remember thinking, is this really how I'm going to have my baby? Locked in a bathroom at my sister-in-law's wedding because my mother-in-law is a psychopath? The whole thing is still a blur. At some point, I must have passed out from the pain, because the next thing I remember is waking up in a hospital bed. Tom was next to me, holding our daughter, and I just burst into tears. I was relieved to see them both, but I was also furious. How did it get to this point? Who even does that to another human being, let alone a family member? After the initial shock wore off, the panic set in. I mean, I knew I was in labor, but I didn't know how far along I was. The contractions were coming fast, and I couldn't exactly time them without my phone. I kept banging on the door, yelling as loud as I could, but no one came. I could hear faint music from downstairs, some classical thing that probably sounded beautiful to everyone else, but felt like a death knell to me. At some point, I just sat on the cold tile floor, crying and praying someone would notice I was missing. I tried to stay calm, but it's hard to keep your head straight when you're scared out of your mind and in that much pain. I remember gripping the edge of the sink, trying to breathe through the contractions. It felt like the universe was playing some cruel joke on me. Eventually, I started yelling again, just desperate for anyone to hear me. I screamed for Tom, but nothing. It felt like hours, though I know now it was probably less than that. Meanwhile, downstairs, Tom told me later, things were kicking off as if nothing had happened. Vanessa was doing her whole slow walk down the aisle thing, and Margaret had apparently slipped right back into her role as the doting mother of the bride. No one noticed I was gone until the ceremony was over, and Tom realized I hadn't come back to my seat. He texted me a couple of times and got no response. That's when he started asking around, trying to figure out where I went. Margaret? She told him I needed some time to myself and brushed him off. Tom said he didn't buy it. He knows I wouldn't just vanish like that. So, while everyone else was mingling and taking pictures, he started looking for me. He checked the parking lot, the bathrooms downstairs, even the car. Nothing. Finally, he decided to check the upstairs bathrooms. He said the second he got close, he heard me yelling. He tried the door and found it locked, and that's when he knew something was seriously wrong. Tom started banging on the door, yelling my name. I don't even remember what I said, but it must have been enough to scare him, because he didn't waste any time breaking the door down. When he got in, I was on the floor, clutching my belly and sobbing. He told me later it was the scariest thing he'd ever seen. He scooped me up and carried me out of there like some action hero, not even stopping to explain to anyone what was going on. He drove like a maniac to the hospital, calling ahead to make sure they were ready for us. I barely remember the drive. It was all a blur of pain and fear. The next thing I remember clearly is waking up in the hospital, holding Lily. She was tiny and perfect, and I just kept crying, overwhelmed that she was okay despite everything. Tom was sitting next to me, looking like he'd been through a war. That's when he told me what happened after we left. Back at the wedding, Margaret and Vanessa were already spinning their version of events. According to Margaret, I'd overreacted and made everything about myself. She told people I had decided to leave because I couldn't handle the heat or the stress or whatever nonsense she came up with on the spot. Vanessa, of course, jumped on the bandwagon, saying I was selfish for walking out on her big day. No one seemed to question it at first. But Tom? He wasn't having any of it. Once he knew Lily and I were safe, he went back to the venue to confront them. He demanded to know what really happened, and that's when Margaret cracked. She admitted to locking me in the bathroom, but tried to justify it by saying she just couldn't handle the stress and decided to leave. I was trying to help. Tom wasn't buying it. Help? He snapped. You locked her in a bathroom while she was in labor. You endangered her life and Lily's. What the hell is wrong with you? Margaret tried to play the victim. I didn't know what else to do, Tom. Was protecting Vanessa's day. Protecting Vanessa? Tom shouted. You're supposed to protect your family, not treat them like garbage. You're dead to me, Margaret. You'll never see Lily or us again. Ever. Margaret added, still admitting her fault bluntly without feeling guilty. I was trying to protect Vanessa's wedding. It wasn't personal. Not personal? I was in labor, and this woman treated me like a problem to be hidden away. Tom completely lost it. He told Margaret she was dead to him, that she'd never see Lily or us again. Vanessa tried to chime in, her tone dripping with sarcasm. If she was that close to giving birth, maybe she should have just stayed home. She knew how important this day was to me. Tom didn't hold back. Important to you? He shot back. She came to support you, even though she was 9 months pregnant. And how did you repay her? By letting your mom lock her in a bathroom while she was in labor. Do you even hear yourself? Vanessa rolled her eyes. It wasn't that serious. Not that serious? Tom growled. I could have lost my wife and daughter because of you two. You're just as selfish as Mom, and I'm done with both of you. Since then, Margaret has been texting nonstop, playing the victim. She keeps saying she made a mistake and did what she thought was best at the time. She wants us to move on as a family. Vanessa hasn't apologized at all. Instead, She's been posting passive-aggressive stuff online like, some people just can't handle letting others have their moment. Tom was furious. He was pushing to press charges against Margaret for endangering my life and Lily's. And honestly, I'm starting to think he's right. I mean, who locks a pregnant woman in labor in a bathroom and thinks that's okay? Vanessa talked to Tom. She was backing Margaret up. She told Tom that I was being overly dramatic and accused me of attention-seeking by even showing up to the wedding while pregnant. She actually said, if she was that close to giving birth, why didn't she just stay home? Like my pregnancy and labor were some kind of personal attack on her. Tom said he couldn't even believe what he was hearing. He told Vanessa that I only came to the wedding because I wanted to support her, and that she should be ashamed of herself for acting like I did something wrong. Vanessa just rolled her eyes and said, this was supposed to be my day. She ruined it. And now you're taking her side? Taking my side? I'm his wife. I was in labor. How is there even a debate here? Margaret then started crying. Actual tears. Like she was the victim. She kept saying things like, I didn't know what else to do, and I never meant to hurt anyone. Tom told her point blank that her excuses didn't matter. What she did was dangerous, selfish, and unforgivable. He said she'd lost our trust forever, and that she would never be a part of Lily's life. Tom didn't just stop there. After he left the wedding, he went straight to the police station to file a report. He didn't even tell me about this until later, because he didn't want to stress me out while I was recovering. When I found out, I felt this weird mix of emotions. Gratitude that he had my back, but also anger that it had to come to this in the first place. The police took his statement, but since no one was seriously injured, it's not a straightforward case. Still, the fact that Margaret locked me in a bathroom during labor is enough for us to consider pursuing legal action. Tom says he doesn't care how long it takes or how messy it gets. He's not letting this slide. Tom and I have been trying to focus on Lily, but it's hard to fully move on when Margaret and Vanessa keep pushing. Margaret even showed up at our house last week, unannounced, banging on the door and demanding to see Lily. Tom didn't even open the door. He just told her through the security camera to leave or he'd call the police. She started yelling about how we were tearing the family apart and how Lily deserves to know her grandmother. Tom was furious. After she left, he called our lawyer to start the process of getting a restraining order. It feels extreme, but at this point, I don't trust her to be around Lily. If she can justify locking me in a bathroom during labor, who knows what else she's capable of? I'm still processing everything. Part of me feels like I'm in some surreal nightmare, and the other part of me is just tired. I'm tired of the drama, the entitlement, the complete lack of accountability from Margaret and Vanessa. I want to focus on Lily and our little family without constantly looking over my shoulder. At the same time, I know this isn't over. Margaret and Vanessa don't seem like the kind of people who will just back off quietly. They'll keep pushing, guilt-tripping, and twisting the narrative to make themselves look like the victims. I guess the question now is, how far do we go to protect ourselves? Do we press charges? Do we cut them off completely? I'm leaning toward no contact, but I don't want to be the one blamed for breaking up the family. Not that it feels like much of a family anymore. Anyway, that's where we're at right now. If you've got advice or if you've dealt with something similar, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you're still interested, stick around for the update. Update 1 point. Hey Reddit, back again. I wish I could say things were cooling down, but nope. Margaret and Vanessa have somehow managed to take this whole mess to the next level. I've been trying to focus on Lily and enjoy these precious newborn moments, but these two refuse to let us have a moment of peace. Let me walk you through the latest. After Margaret's midnight visit, we thought maybe, just maybe, she'd get the hint and leave us alone. Clearly, I was wrong. A few days later, we got a package in the mail from her. At first, I thought it was some kind of apology gift, like flowers or a baby blanket. Nope. It was a photo album, but not a sweet, sentimental one. This thing was full of pictures from Vanessa's wedding, with sticky notes slapped onto the pages that read things like, "What a beautiful day," and "It's a shame some people couldn't appreciate it." I don't know if I was more confused or angry. Who even does that? It felt like Margaret was taunting us, trying to rub in the fact that she still sees the wedding as more important than the fact that I was locked in a bathroom during labor. Tom wanted to throw the album straight in the trash, but I told him to keep it as evidence, just in case we need it later. And then came the text messages. Margaret started spamming Tom with these over-the-top guilt trips, saying things like, "I gave you life and this is how you repay me," or "You'll regret alienating your mother when I'm gone." She also threw in some weird veiled threats like, "Family is forever. You can't erase me no matter how hard you try." Tom was over it. He didn't even bother responding. Instead, He forwarded everything to our lawyer and added her number to the block list. But Margaret wasn't done. Oh no. She called from a different number a few days later, and when Tom picked up, she started crying, like full-on sobbing. She kept saying she was losing her family, and begged Tom to forgive her. When that didn't work, she flipped the script. The tears stopped, and she started yelling about how I'm the real problem. According to her, I've brainwashed Tom and turned him against his own family. She even accused me of being jealous of Vanessa's wedding. Jealous of a wedding where I went into labor and nearly had my baby locked in a bathroom. Vanessa, of course, has been just as bad. She hasn't reached out to me directly, but she's been all over social media, posting passive-aggressive digs and cryptic quotes about fake people and disloyalty. She even posted a wedding photo with a caption like, "At least I know who really loves me." Tom's friends have been sending us screenshots because apparently everyone in their circle knows what happened and thinks Vanessa is out of her mind. One post in particular sent me over the edge. She wrote, "Some people can't stand to let others have their moment. I guess that says more about them than it does about me." I almost responded, but Tom stopped me. He said engaging with her would just give her the attention she craves, and he's probably right. But it's so hard to stay quiet when she's out there rewriting history like she's the victim. The line was crossed when Margaret tried to rope other family members into her mess. She called Tom's older brother Andrew and spun this sob story about how we're being cruel and cutting her out of our lives for no reason. Andrew called Tom, all concerned, and asked if we were okay. When Tom explained the real story, Andrew was floored. He had no idea how bad things were and said he fully supports us going no contact. But Margaret didn't stop with Andrew. She started calling Tom's aunts, uncles, cousins, basically anyone who would listen, and telling them her twisted version of events. She made it sound like I threw a tantrum at the wedding, stormed out, and then forced Tom to cut ties with his family. Some of them believed her, at least at first. We started getting texts from distant relatives asking, "What's going on with Margaret? She seems so upset." Tom had to send out this massive group text clarifying what actually happened. He kept it short and to the point, saying, "For anyone who's heard Margaret's version of events, here's the truth. She locked my wife in a bathroom while she was in labor to protect Vanessa's wedding. We are no longer in contact with her for the safety of our family." Most people were supportive, but a few still sided with Margaret, saying things like, "She's your mom, though. Can't you work it out?" It's exhausting having to defend ourselves over something that should be so obviously wrong. At this point, Tom and I have decided to go fully no contact with both Margaret and Vanessa. We're also moving forward with a restraining order against Margaret. It feels extreme, but I don't trust her not to escalate. She's already proven she doesn't care about my safety, or Lily's, and I refuse to let her guilt us into giving her access to our daughter. Vanessa is a lost cause. She hasn't apologized, hasn't shown an ounce of remorse, and seems more concerned with playing the victim than owning up to her actions. I'm done trying to understand her or give her the benefit of the doubt. Some people just aren't worth the effort. Writing all this out has been cathartic, but it also makes me realize how insane the whole situation is. I keep thinking, how did we get here? I never imagined I'd be dealing with this kind of drama, especially with family. But I guess some people are so wrapped up in their own egos that they'll hurt anyone to protect their image. Anyway, thanks for reading, Reddit. If you've got advice for navigating no contact or dealing with toxic family, I'd love to hear it. And if you're still interested, I'll write an update. Final update. Hey, Reddit. Thanks for sticking with me through all of this. I honestly didn't think things could escalate more after everything we've been through, but Margaret and Vanessa have this uncanny ability to dig the hole deeper. Still, I think we've finally hit a turning point, or at least, I hope we have. Let me tell you how it all went down. After deciding to go fully no contact, Tom and I started putting some boundaries in place to protect our family. We officially filed for a restraining order against Margaret. Our lawyer was confident we had a solid case, especially with the texts, social media posts, and Tom's statement to the police. I wasn't thrilled about having to go through this legal process. Trust me, it's not fun, but I knew it was necessary. Margaret got served about a week ago. We didn't hear anything directly from her, thanks to the block list, but we knew it happened because she immediately went into damage control mode. Within hours, several of Tom's relatives were calling us, saying Margaret was devastated and claiming we'd gone too far. One of her cousins even said, "She's your mom. Aren't you being a little harsh?" Tom's response was perfect. He said, "If you think it's okay to lock a pregnant woman in labor in a bathroom, feel free to reach out to Margaret. Otherwise, stay out of it." That shut most of them up, though a few still tried to argue that family is everything. Funny how people only say that when they're not the ones being mistreated. The real drama came when Margaret decided to show up at Tom's workplace. Yeah, you read that right. She actually went to his office demanding to see him. Tom works in a pretty professional environment, and Margaret making a scene there is next level mortifying. Security had to escort her out after she started yelling in the lobby about how Tom was brainwashed and that I was tearing the family apart. Tom was furious when he found out. He immediately called our lawyer to report the incident, and we updated the restraining order to include his workplace. It's wild to me that Margaret thought this was an acceptable way to fix things. If anything, it just reinforced why we needed to cut her off in the first place. But as it turns out, Margaret wasn't done yet. Just when we thought she'd finally gotten the message, she managed to outdo herself in the worst way possible. This time filed for grandparent visitation rights. Let me explain what happened. So, a couple of weeks after we got the restraining order finalized and thought we were free of their chaos, Tom got a call from a lawyer. Not our lawyer, their lawyer. He told us that Margaret and Vanessa decided to try and file for grandparent visitation rights. Margaret actually believes she has the legal right to force her way into Lily's life after everything she's done. At first, I thought it was a joke. Like, who does this? But no, it was very real. According to the paperwork, Margaret claimed she had been unfairly denied access to her granddaughter, and that it was causing her emotional distress. She painted herself as this doting grandmother who was cruelly cut out of our lives for no reason. Vanessa even added a statement to the filing, backing up Margaret's claims and saying that I was unstable and manipulating Tom. I couldn't believe the audacity. This is the same woman who locked me in a bathroom while I was in labor, and now she's trying to paint herself as some kind of victim? The sheer entitlement of it all was mind-blowing. Our lawyer, thankfully, wasn't fazed. She told us that grandparents' rights cases are hard to win, especially when the parents are married, both alive, and there's no history of abuse or neglect. Margaret didn't have a leg to stand on. But still, the fact that she even tried was infuriating. It felt like she was treating this whole thing like a game, trying to win at being the most toxic person alive. Tom and I were furious, but we stayed calm and let our lawyer handle it. She filed a response outlining everything Margaret had done, from locking me in the bathroom to harassing us at home and work. We included screenshots of Margaret's texts, Vanessa's social media posts, and even the police report. If Margaret thought this was going to be her big moment to look like the good guy, she was in for a rude awakening. At the hearing, Margaret and Vanessa showed up looking like they were auditioning for a daytime drama. Margaret brought tissues and kept dabbing at her eyes, her voice trembling. "Your Honor," she said, "I've been unfairly denied access to my granddaughter. I only want to be part of her life. Family is sacred." Our lawyer didn't hold back. Sacred? Is that what you call locking a pregnant woman in labor in a bathroom to protect a wedding? Is that how you show love? She asked, her voice sharp. The judge turned to Margaret, his face unreadable. "Did you do that?" Margaret stammered. It was a misunderstanding. I was trying to—" "Enough," the judge said, cutting her off. "There is no justification for endangering a pregnant woman and her unborn child. Request for visitation is denied." When it was our turn, our lawyer didn't hold back. She laid out the facts in brutal detail, emphasizing how Margaret had endangered my life, and Lily's, by locking me in a bathroom while I was in labor. She highlighted the restraining order and the ongoing harassment. By the time she was done, the judge looked like he was ready to throw Margaret out of the courtroom. The judge didn't even need much time to deliberate. He denied Margaret's request on the spot and made it clear that her behavior was unacceptable. He even warned her that any further attempts to harass or contact us would result in serious consequences. I've never seen someone deflate so quickly. Margaret and Vanessa stormed out of the courtroom without a word, and that was that. After the hearing, Tom and I finally felt like we could breathe again. Margaret and Vanessa haven't contacted us since, and I think the humiliation of losing in court might have finally gotten through to them. I can't say for sure that they're out of our lives for good, but for now, we have peace. Looking back, it's hard to believe how far they were willing to go to control our lives. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that you have to stand your ground against toxic people, no matter how much they try to twist the narrative. Lily deserves a happy, healthy environment to grow up in, and I'll do whatever it takes to give her that. Thank you, Reddit, for listening to my story and offering advice along the way. Writing this all out has been a weird kind of therapy, and I appreciate everyone who took the time to read and comment. If you're dealing with your own toxic family drama, just know that you're not alone, and you don't have to put up with it. Stay strong, set those boundaries, and protect your peace. Signing off for now, but who knows? If Margaret or Vanessa pulls another stunt, I might be back with an update. Fingers crossed it doesn't come to that.
My husband humiliated me at the polo ground, introducing his girlfriend as his future wife. When I confronted him, his rage turned violent. He tied me behind a horse, leaving me injured and helpless. A stranger saved me just in time. But the very next day, I returned, not as a victim, but with a revenge so terrifying he never saw it coming. My name is Sophia, and if someone had told me that my life would take such a dramatic turn, I might have laughed. I used to believe I had it all, my passion for polo, a supportive community, and a husband who seemed to understand me. At least, that's what I thought. Growing up in a suburban area known for its vibrant polo grounds, I fell in love with the sport at a young age. Polo wasn't just a game to me, it was my sanctuary, my passion, and the place where I truly felt alive. By my late 20s, I was recognized as one of the most skilled players in our community. It wasn't easy juggling a competitive sport in a small town, but the joy I felt on the field made every challenge worthwhile. When I met Ethan, I thought I'd found someone who admired my strength and independence. Ethan was older than me, in his mid-30s, and his confidence had a way of making you believe in him. He said all the right things, praising my talent and encouraging my dreams, or so it seemed at first. Ethan was charming, and I was smitten. He made me feel like I could trust him, like he'd be my partner in all things. Little did I know that trust would be shattered. Even after our marriage, I continued to pursue my passion for polo. I remember how he'd occasionally show up at matches, watching me play with a detached sort of interest. Sometimes, I'd catch a glimpse of pride in his eyes, but more often than not, it felt like he was just waiting. For what I didn't know, at home, Ethan's charm began to wear thin. He'd criticize my focus on the sport, telling me I was wasting my time chasing a childish hobby. I brushed it off at first, convincing myself that he didn't mean it, that maybe he was just having a bad day. But the comments became sharper and more frequent. "Sophia, don't you think it's time to grow up?" he'd say, his tone dripping with disdain. "You're not some teenager chasing dreams." I didn't understand why he was so dismissive. He'd married a polo player. He knew who I was. But I stayed quiet, thinking I could balance both worlds, my love for the game and my marriage. It was a delicate line to walk, and I tried so hard not to falter. One bright afternoon, everything changed. I'd just finished a practice session at the polo grounds, feeling the usual rush of satisfaction after a good game. The sun was shining, the air was crisp, and I was chatting with a few teammates when Ethan arrived. He wasn't alone. Walking beside him was a young woman, elegant and composed, dressed in expensive clothes that screamed wealth and status. She was strikingly beautiful, the kind of beauty that turned heads wherever she went. Ethan didn't waste any time with pleasantries. Instead, he smiled, a smug, self-satisfied smile, and said, "Sophia, meet Olivia, my future wife." For a moment, I thought it was a cruel joke. My heart raced, and my mouth went dry as I stared at him, trying to process his words.
"What?"
I managed to whisper, my voice trembling. "You heard me," he said, his tone casual, as if he were discussing the weather. "Olivia and I are getting married. She's everything you're not, sophisticated, wealthy, and worth my time." I was frozen, too shocked to respond. The people around us had fallen silent, their eyes darting between us. Ethan's words hit me like a punch to the gut. "How dare you?" I finally said, my voice breaking. He didn't flinch. "Oh, spare me the drama, Sophia. You're just a cheap girl wasting your time with silly games. Olivia is the kind of woman who can actually make a difference in my life." His cruelty was like a dagger, cutting deep and leaving me gasping for air. I felt humiliated, betrayed, and utterly devastated. This was the man I had trusted, the man I had believed in. And here he was, parading his betrayal in front of everyone. I turned to Olivia, searching for some sign of guilt or remorse, but her expression was unreadable. She didn't say a word, just stood there, looking almost detached. I felt like my entire world was crumbling around me. "You're disgusting," I said to Ethan, my voice trembling with anger and pain. "You think you can treat people like this and get away with it?" His response was a cold laugh. "Oh, Sophia. Grow up." I wanted to scream, to lash out, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain he'd caused me. But instead, I walked away, tears streaming down my face. In that moment, I felt utterly alone. Ethan had shattered my trust, my dignity, and everything I thought I knew about him. But as much as his betrayal hurt, something inside me refused to give up. I didn't know how yet, but I was determined to find a way to rise above the pain he had inflicted on me. Looking back, I realized the day was just the beginning. What followed would test me in ways I could never have imagined, pushing me to my limits and forcing me to uncover a strength I didn't know I had. The hours after that humiliating encounter with Ethan were a blur of disbelief and heartbreak. I felt like I was drowning in emotions I couldn't process: anger, sorrow, confusion, and most of all, a sense of betrayal so deep it left me breathless. I couldn't understand how someone I had loved, someone I thought loved me, could treat me with such cruelty. I spent the night replaying his words in my mind, each one cutting like a knife. The next morning, I decided to confront Ethan. I couldn't let this go unanswered. He owed me an explanation, if not for his sake, then for mine. I found him in the living room, casually scrolling through his phone as if nothing had happened. "We need to talk," I said firmly, though my voice wavered slightly. He didn't even look up. "About what?" he asked, his tone indifferent. "About what happened yesterday. About Olivia. About you introducing her as your future wife, while I'm still your wife. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was for me?" He finally put his phone down and looked at me, his expression cold. "Humiliating for you? Sophia, let's not make this about feelings. I'm being honest with you. Isn't that what you always wanted? Honesties, honesties," I repeated, my voice rising. "You call flaunting another woman in front of me honesty? You've been lying to me, Ethan, and now you want to act like you're doing me a favor?" He stood up, towering over me with an intimidating presence I hadn't noticed before. "You don't get it, do you? Olivia is my future. She comes from wealth, from power. She's someone who can actually elevate my life, not hold me back like you do." "Hold you back?" I said, incredulous. "I've supported you in every way I could, Ethan. I've worked hard to keep this marriage together despite your constant criticism and belittling of my passion. And now you're blaming me for holding you back." He rolled his eyes. "Spare me the speech, Sophia. You're nothing more than a cheap girl wasting her time on a silly game. You think polo is going to make you important? It's laughable." Those words broke something inside me. All the years of self-doubt he'd planted in me, all the times I had second-guessed myself because of his disdain, came rushing to the surface. "I don't care what you think about polo, Ethan," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "But you don't get to decide my worth. And you certainly don't get to treat me like I'm disposable." That's when his demeanor shifted. His indifference turned to rage, and before I knew it, he grabbed my arm and dragged me toward the door. "You want to see how disposable you are?" he hissed. "Let me show you." I struggled against his grip, but Ethan was strong, and his anger made him even more forceful. He dragged me outside, toward the polo ground where I had spent so many happy hours. It was empty now, eerily silent except for the sound of my protests and his heavy breathing. "Ethan, stop. What are you doing?" I pleaded, panic rising in my chest. He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed a length of rope from the equipment shed and tied me to one of the practice poles. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. "Ethan, this is insane. Let me go." But he wasn't listening. He mounted his horse, his eyes dark with fury. "You think you're so tough, Sophia? Let's see how tough you are when you're lying there helpless." And then he did something I'll never forget. He rode his horse dangerously close to me, circling around at a terrifying speed. Each pass was closer than the last, the horse's hooves kicking up dust and rocks that hit my face and arms. The fear was suffocating. I could barely breathe, my screams drowned out by the sound of the galloping horse. The physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional devastation. How could someone I had once loved turn into this monster? Every time I cried out, hoping he'd stop. He seemed to grow more exhilarated. It was like he fed off my fear. And then suddenly it stopped. I didn't know why at first. My vision was blurred with tears, and I was too terrified to make sense of what was happening. But when I opened my eyes, I saw Olivia standing a few feet away, her face pale and her eyes wide with shock. "What the hell is wrong with you, Ethan?" she shouted, her voice trembling. "Stay out of this, Olivia," Ethan barked. "This is between me and my wife." But Olivia didn't back down. She pulled out her phone and started recording. "You're insane," she said, her voice steadier now. "If you don't stop this right now, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you are." Ethan hesitated, glaring at her. For a moment, I thought he might lash out at her too. But then, as if realizing he couldn't win this fight, he dismounted and stormed away, leaving me tied and sobbing on the ground. Olivia rushed to me, her hands shaking as she untied the ropes. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine concern. I couldn't answer. I was too overwhelmed by everything that had just happened. But in that moment, I realized something. Olivia wasn't my enemy. She had seen the monster Ethan truly was, and for reasons I couldn't yet understand, she had chosen to help me. When Olivia untied me and helped me to my feet, I was too shaken to fully grasp the weight of what had just happened. My body ached from the bruises, but it was the betrayal that hurt the most. Ethan wasn't just cruel, he was dangerous. As I leaned against Olivia for support, I couldn't understand why she had stepped in. After all, wasn't she the woman Ethan had so brazenly declared his future wife? "Let's get you to the hospital," Olivia said softly, her tone kind but urgent. She wrapped her arm around me and led me toward her car, ignoring the cloud of dust that still lingered in the air. I wanted to resist. I wanted to tell her I didn't need her help, that I could handle this on my own. But the truth was I couldn't. I was too battered and broken, physically and emotionally, to push her away. So, I let her guide me, every step feeling heavier than the last. The drive to the hospital was quiet, except for Olivia occasionally asking if I was okay. I didn't know what to say. How could I be okay after what Ethan had done? After what he had revealed himself to be? My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, questions I couldn't answer, and emotions I couldn't contain. But one question burned brighter than the rest. Why had Olivia stepped in? At the hospital, the staff immediately took me in, treating the cuts and bruises Ethan's cruelty had left behind. Olivia stayed with me the entire time, sitting quietly in the corner of the room as the nurses worked. She didn't look like the poised, confident woman Ethan had introduced at the polo ground. Instead, she looked shaken, as though the events of the day had unsettled her as much as they had broken me. When the nurse left us alone, Olivia finally spoke. "I'm so sorry, Sophia," she said, her voice trembling. "I had no idea Ethan was capable of something like that." I looked at her, unsure how to respond. Was this sympathy genuine, or was it just guilt? "You didn't know?" I asked, my voice hoarse from crying. "You're the one he's planning to marry. How could you not know who he really is?" Olivia sighed and looked down, twisting her hands in her lap. "I don't know what I was thinking. Ethan, he's charming, persuasive. He made me believe in this image of himself that isn't real. I thought I knew him, but after today," she paused, shaking her head. "I can't believe I ever trusted him." I wanted to tell her that she should have seen it sooner, that she should have known better. But the truth was, I had fallen for the same charm, the same lies. Ethan had fooled both of us. "What he did to you today," Olivia continued, her voice breaking, "was horrifying. I can't stand by and let him get away with it." Her words took me by surprise. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to help you," she said firmly. "Ethan needs to face the consequences of what he's done. To you, to me, to anyone who's been caught in his web." I stared at her, trying to gauge her sincerity. Was she serious? Could I trust her? But as I looked into her eyes, I saw something I hadn't expected. Guilt, remorse, and a determination that mirrored my own. "Why would you do that?" I asked cautiously. "After everything." "Because what he did was wrong," Olivia said, her voice unwavering now. And because I can't marry someone like that. I won't. Today, I saw who he really is, and I don't want any part of it. Her words hung in the air, and for the first time since Ethan's betrayal, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to fight back. Over the next few days, Olivia and I began working together. She showed me the video she had recorded of Ethan's violent outburst, a chilling reminder of his cruelty. "This is evidence," she said, her tone determined. "We can use this to bring him to justice." It wasn't easy. Every step of the process felt like reopening the wounds Ethan had left behind. But Olivia's support gave me strength. She wasn't just apologizing for her role in my pain. She was actively trying to make things right. We went to the authorities, presenting the video and recounting the events of that awful day. The officers were appalled, and their response was swift. A case was opened against Ethan, charging him with assault, abuse, and endangerment. As the legal wheels began to turn, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in weeks: empowerment. For so long, I had let Ethan's words and actions define me, but now, I was taking control. With Olivia by my side, I wasn't just surviving, I was fighting back. It was ironic, really. The woman Ethan had brought into my life to replace me was now the one helping me expose him. Olivia and I were an unlikely team, but together, we were stronger than I ever imagined. The path ahead was uncertain, and the battle was far from over. But for the first time, I felt like justice was within reach. And this time, I wasn't fighting alone. The days leading up to the trial were some of the most difficult of my life. Reliving the trauma of Ethan's betrayal and abuse was like ripping open a wound that had barely begun to heal. But I knew I couldn't give up. Ethan needed to face the consequences of what he had done, not just for me, but for every person he had hurt or manipulated. And with Olivia by my side, I felt stronger. Olivia surprised me in more ways than I can count. She didn't just stand by me, she fought alongside me. She was relentless in gathering evidence against Ethan, digging through old messages, emails, and anything that might prove his pattern of deceit and abuse. She even connected with others who had crossed paths with Ethan and had similar stories of his manipulation. It was as though once the veil of his charm had been lifted, the truth became glaringly obvious. When the trial began, I was terrified. Ethan was still the man I had once loved, and part of me dreaded seeing him again. But as I sat in that courtroom, surrounded by lawyers, reporters, and strangers, I reminded myself why I was there. This wasn't about the past anymore. It was about reclaiming my future. Ethan walked into the courtroom with the same smug confidence I had once found so captivating. He didn't even glance in my direction. His arrogance was infuriating, but it also strengthened my resolve. He truly believed he was untouchable. He thought he could continue to manipulate and abuse without facing any consequences. But not this time. The prosecution presented the video Olivia had recorded, a stark and undeniable piece of evidence. Watching it play out on the screen was harrowing. Seeing myself tied up, crying out for help as Ethan's horse circled dangerously close, was like reliving the nightmare all over again. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of my voice in the video, raw and filled with fear. I glanced at Ethan, hoping to see some sign of remorse, but there was none. He sat there, his face expressionless, as though the events in the video were happening to someone else. But the jury's reaction was clear. Their faces were a mix of shock and disgust, and for the first time, I felt like justice might actually be possible. When it was my turn to testify, my hands trembled as I took the stand. I spoke about the person Ethan had pretended to be, the man I thought I had married, and how that illusion had shattered over time. I described his growing disdain for me, his cruel words, and the terrifying day when he had taken his anger to a horrifying level. I also spoke about Olivia, how she had stepped in when no one else did, how she had risked her own safety to stop Ethan and bring him to justice. She could have walked away, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion welling inside me. But she chose to do the right thing. And, because of her, I'm standing here today. Olivia testified too. Her words were powerful, painting a picture of the man Ethan truly was, a manipulative, abusive individual who cared for no one but himself. She recounted how she had believed his lies, how she had fallen for his charm, and how her perception of him had shattered when she saw his true nature. "I was horrified," she said, her voice breaking. "But I knew I couldn't stay silent. What he did to Sophia was monstrous, and he needs to be held accountable." Ethan's defense tried to discredit us, painting me as a bitter wife clinging to her anger and Olivia as a jilted lover seeking revenge. But the evidence spoke louder than their words. The video, the testimonies, the corroborating accounts from others who had experienced Ethan's manipulations, it all painted a damning picture. When the verdict was finally read, my heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the judge's words. But then I heard them clearly. Guilty. Ethan was sentenced to a lengthy prison term for assault, abuse, and endangerment. The relief that washed over me was overwhelming. For so long, I had felt powerless against him, but now, justice had been served. He couldn't hurt anyone else. Not anymore. After the trial, Olivia and I stood outside the courthouse, the weight of the ordeal finally lifting. "Thank you," I said to her, my voice filled with gratitude. "I don't know how I would have done this without you." She smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We did it together, Sophia. You're stronger than you think." Looking back, I realized she was right. The journey hadn't just been about holding Ethan accountable. It had been about rediscovering my own strength. I wasn't the same woman who had let Ethan's words and actions define her. I had fought back, found my voice, and reclaimed my life. The scars he left would always be a part of me, but they didn't define me. What defined me was the courage to stand up, the resilience to keep going, and the support of an unexpected ally who reminded me that justice is worth fighting for. As I walked away from the courthouse that day, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Ethan's chapter in my life was finally closed, and for the first time, I was ready to write my own story.